Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give it a minute to let folks trickle in. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's great to see so many people here. I hope wherever you are, it's not as hot as it is in Philadelphia because we are having some scorching weather. And if you are coming from the Mid-Atlantic, I feel you. Getting a little flame emoji from Samantha. Yeah. All right. Oh, yeah. 90s. Oof. Yeah. Hang in there, everybody. Uh, yeah, 110. That's not great. Oh, low hundreds in St. Louis. Oh my gosh. It's all over, isn't it? Uh, well, anyway, on that note, goodness, on that note, on this hot day, um, with all these heat alerts all over the country. Welcome to Lost, Found, and Everything in Between, Surviving Inventory Surprises. Uh, my name is Greg Stewart. I'm the Education Program Manager at the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. I use they and he pronouns. And for accessibility's sake, I will say I'm a white person with clear glasses and a headset and a white shirt. And my background is currently blurred because I am in a shared office. Um, and so just a little bit about our program today. So you all probably know inventories can be stressful enough. When unexpected situations arise, like old loans, undocumented objects, or even a mold outbreak, it can feel downright overwhelming. Today, you'll hear from Preservation Specialist Katie Lowe for a crash course in surviving the tough or tougher things that can arise during the inventory process. You'll learn about the most common issues you may encounter, immediate response procedures, and methods for mitigating repeat problems. And just a reminder, this is the third and final installment in our sort of loose inventory webinar series. The first inventorying collections for museums and inventorying for archives can be found and accessed for free on our YouTube channel. And Katie's going to put that in the chat if you want to go directly to those previous webinars. But you don't need to have watched them to participate in today's webinar. These are meant to all be standalone if needed. So before we get into Katie's presentation, just some Zoom housekeeping. You are in Zoom webinar, so your video and your audio are turned off, but you can ask questions or make comments to us in the chat. This program is auto closed captioned in English, and you can turn on subtitles with the little CC button in the Zoom toolbar. We'll have a presentation from our speaker, followed by Q&A with you, but please feel free to ask questions anytime during the program. We're recording today, and we'll send a recording as well as a PowerPoint and any resources we may have shared in a follow-up email. So I will say this program series used to be funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, which allows us to provide high-quality educational programs in fulfillment of our mission. But given federal budget cuts, it no longer is. So please consider a donation to CCAHA or an institutional membership if that applies to you, so we can continue to keep our webinars free of cost to all. And no donation is too small. Every little bit helps. And Katie's going to put a link to the donation page in the chat as well. Also, Katie, when you're ready, if you could go to the next slide.
Yes, give me 1 second. I just need to pull up that donate link real quick.
That's okay. We're one of our staff members is on a out of office trip, so we're down a little bit on our Zoom end here. Thank you, Katie. Thanks
You're
everybody for
welcome.
being patient with us as we do this on our
There we
own
go.
here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just a quick note about the organization that we work for, CCHA. We're a regional conservation lab and preservation services facility. We're based here in Philadelphia, but we work with organizations and clients all across the country. Our conservators treat paper-based objects like books, photographs, documents, artwork, and paper, and more. And our preservation services staff, of which Katie and I are both part of, work in the field providing educational programs such as this one and helping institutions plan for the future of their collections. The center also offers a wide range of digitization services as well as fundraising assistance, housing, framing, and more. And you can learn more about what we do at our website, ccha.org. So, a little bit more about our speaker. In her position as preservation specialist, Katie Lowe conducts on-site preservation needs and risk assessments and assists with preservation and emergency planning at cultural heritage organizations across the country. Katie is a public historian with over 14 years of experience in museums, community programming, nonprofit work, and education. She has held positions at the Holocaust Awareness Museum and Education Center, Pennsbury Manor, the Mercer Museum, and others, just to name a few. She received her BA in History and Education from Ursinus College and her MA in History and Museum Studies from UNC Greensboro. And with that, I will let Katie take it away.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everybody. For accessibility purposes, I will say I am a white woman with brown hair wearing a maroon top. Also, I'm home today, working from home, and I have kept my sleeping dogs on screen. My office doubles as their guest room, which is where the dogs like to nap during the day. It's a stressful time in general. We are talking about something stressful today. So for those of you viewing, instead of just listening, you have this nice visual here, and we'll all just cross our fingers and hope they don't get up and bark or cause some other nonsense while they're on screen here today. All right, let's get started. Okay, if you came to my first inventory webinar, some slides here are going to be a little bit familiar to you, including all of these little cues I'm going to have in here asking you to please relax. I know that inventories, like Greg alluded to earlier, are already at a baseline extremely stressful, and then you add in the intricacies of potential hazards, all the legal intricacies related to found in collections or old loans, on top of all of the other things that you're doing all the time, every day in your positions. And it's really easy to get hard on yourself about these things, to lose sleep about it. I say this in most webinars and most workshops. If you've ever done any with me, I really think it's important to remember that the practice of collecting and exhibiting is a lot older than any of these professional standards we're going to discuss today. So anybody who's in a collections management position is in some way dealing with reconciling their collection and past decisions that were made without these standards. So you're not alone, you're not behind. This is endemic to the field. It is not your individual job to make sense of it right now, today, or even tomorrow, or even in the next year. So just let it take the time it's going to take. Take some breaths. Look at my dogs. I've put some giggles in here as well, so hopefully we can all kind of just loosen up and take what we can from this. On that note, I have a few reminders. These were also in the other inventory webinar. I really want to remind everybody that you're not going to leave this session an expert, and that's okay, and it's not your job. Specifically, I'm referencing things like legal intricacies when we're dealing with found in collections, old loans, abandoned property. Anytime that you're dealing with that kind of thing, you're going to be consulting legal counsel anyway, or consulting written texts that have already been created by the experts. What I want you to think of this as is an opportunity to raise your awareness of what these things might be that you might encounter during an inventory, and have a general roadmap for how to respond when they happen. But you don't need to remember all the specific details and literally exactly what to do in every different scenario, because those resources exist already. Similarly, perfectionism is not your friend. This is coming from somebody who has done an inventory before on a previously uninventoried collection. You likely will not get everything exactly where you want it the first time you do it, and that's okay. You're going to have to leave some things half finished, circle back to them in a year. Try to be okay with that. That's just the nature of work in general. Also, I really hope that you leave here maybe a little less motivated by your stress and a little more motivated by love of the job. Stress is a really great motivator in the short term, and it is not in the long term. None of these things are so urgent that you should sacrifice your mental health or your physical health for them. There are certain things that will come up at the inventory, like mold or pests, that need to be immediately addressed with some urgency. But you can literally put things on ice in certain situations. We'll talk about that in a minute. Knowledge is power. I know sometimes it can be really attractive to just keep looking the other way. But if we know what we're dealing with, we know how to deal with it. And a lot of the times it's not as scary as what our brain has come up with. I was thinking about this morning, and I was making myself laugh thinking about that movie Signs and how the aliens were really scary until they actually showed up on screen. And then you were like, what is that? Everything we'd thought of was way scarier than what the actual situation was. And it's true for this kind of work too. Finally, I want you to remember that the dishes are never done. As I said earlier, everyone is doing some sort of inventory or preservation or collections care work all the time, constantly. It is the underpinning of this job, of this field. We're all muddling through it in our own ways at any given point, and it's okay for you to never really like wrap a bow up on it. All right. If you remember nothing else from that slide that I just had up on screen, please remember this one. The goal here is to respond, not to react. You're going to feel a lot of urgency from outside participants, outside forces. You might feel some urgency from within. Try to make peace with that and not react to it. Again, there are very few things that are so urgent that they need to be immediately addressed. And even in those situations, like mold, we can literally put it on ice and then come back and address it later when we are in a better position to do so. Okay, so before we go any further, this is a little bit of a recap from the first one, but I just want to do a quick recap of what an inventory actually is. So I have a little bit of a sliding scale on screen here. To the left, I have a definition of what I would consider an inventory at its most basic, which is a list of objects in a collection and their locations. On the other end of that, we have the most complex, the most comprehensive, the pie in the sky ideal version of an inventory, which is a complete report of the status of their collections. Everything that's in the collection, where is it? Where did you get it from? What is its current state? How is it being used? Who's accessing it? Everything that you might possibly need to know. Very few institutions, if any at all, are able to complete an inventory of that magnitude, especially if it's the first time that they're ever doing one. So I encourage you to think of an inventory that you want to shoot for as somewhere in between. If what you have to start with is that basic version, that's fine. Eventually you're shooting for this one in the middle, which would be a list of the property held by a collecting organization. That could be an archive, a museum, a university. Ideally, connecting each object to an identification number, a physical location, and a record. A record simply refers to that the metadata, that list of information about the thing itself. So any information that is additional to where is it, what is its identification number, and what do you call it? Generally, there are 3 different types of inventories. What we just defined is a complete inventory. So that's going to include all the objects in the permanent collection, in addition to acquired objects that have not yet been accessioned, objects in temporary custody, loans, and external loans. It's good to perform these routinely so that you have it up to date. You also may be completing a partial inventory. So this is focused on one part of the collection and is usually precipitated by some sort of activity that you're about to do, like an exhibit or an external loan or a subset of the collection that you're all going to send off for treatment at a lab. And so it might be all of the objects in one storage room. It might be the objects about to go on exhibit, or objects gifted by a specific donor. And maybe somewhere in that donor agreement, they say that you have to do a partial inventory every 3 years. Finally, we have our spot inventory. This is the most limited in scope. We're doing this to monitor record accuracy and overall collections health through a representative sampling of objects. This is also something that we want to perform routinely, more routinely than the complete inventory because it doesn't take as much manpower. And it's a really good way to just sort of check in and consider the spot inventory as sort of a case study or microcosm of the overall health of the collection. Why are we doing inventories? I really like this quote from the 5th edition of Museum Registration Methods. I included it in the last one as well. I think it really gets at the heart of the ethical obligations that we have as collection stewards, which is that the objects in our collections are not ours. They are not even our museums. These objects belong to current and future generations, and as such are not ours to lose track of or misplace. This slide, I told Greg earlier, this slide's been making me laugh for 2 weeks. That's scary enough to be dealt that responsibility, but then also as you're trying to do so, any one of these sticky situations may pop up, which we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth today. And you probably are having any one of the reactions on screen, if not all of them at the same time, if not one day and another the next. Totally reasonable. These are complex, complicated things that you may be finding contradictory information for online. Maybe you learned about it in graduate school like 10 years ago, but you haven't had a chance to deal with it now and you don't know where your books are from grad school. Any reaction is normal and totally justified. What you might deal with are old loans, undocumented objects and missing objects, missing or incorrect information in the record, hazards, condition issues or rehousing needs, or something that is eligible for NAGPRA compliance. We're going to talk about each of these today. We're going to talk about general roadmaps for responding, and hopefully you're able to walk away feeling a little bit more chilled out and relaxed. I used Michelle Tanner a lot in my first inventory webinar. She's making a lot of repeat appearances here as well. So let's dive into it. Let's start with old loans. So when we say old loans, we're talking about loans that have either expired, so the contract has ended, or it is a loan of unlimited duration, meaning at the outset, there was no defined end period put into the loan contract. So either of those starting situations, and also the lenders cannot be contacted or are not currently in contact with the museum. This can be caused by a few things, all of which are sort of common and difficult to avoid, given the nature of how our field works. You know, we're often completing multiple jobs. Staffing is short, time is short, and money is short. And that can result in things like high turnover at the lending institution or at your institution, which is often paired with a lack of succession planning. It can be caused by incomplete or inconsistent record keeping. No loan policy. So maybe it was a gentleman's agreement or a handshake that went into that indeterminate loan, and there's no paperwork to actually track that that was a decision that was made by two people. That can be exacerbated by deaths, deaths of the loaner, deaths of their descendants, just lost contact over time. And all of this is compounded by the passage of time, which goes by faster than any of us intended to. And things that may start off small, like not really having written down the parameters of your agreement, only get more complex and difficult to deal with as time passes on, as generations turn over, as there's no one who was there originally to pass that information directly on to the person that's now trying to deal with it. So here is a broad overview of your response. This is how all of our response steps are going to look. It's kind of like a flow chart that I've created. It works best for my mind. Give us feedback if it doesn't work well for your mind. I personally love a flow chart, but I would love to know if there's a better way I can visualize this moving forward. The way it is now, so your initiating step, the first thing you're going to do after you've discovered the issue at hand will be colored in green. All middle steps are in this kind of like peachy red color. And then the final step is in this sort of yellow color at the end there. So it goes green, red, yellow. So let's say you find the old loan. The first thing you're going to do is make a note in the record. You can do that in any way that works for you and your organization. Maybe you have a collections management system that has a flagging option. Maybe you literally just write notes. You have an Excel spreadsheet and you have a notes column, put it there. Maybe you then also highlight that cell in yellow, whatever it is that you have already established or need to establish so that it makes sense for you and anyone else doing collections management. Then you will attempt to locate the lender. If you are able to locate them, you're going to attempt to contact them. In all of your attempts to both locate and contact, make sure that you are keeping some sort of written paper trail, written record. So any emails that you're sending, any requests for information that you're submitting, any calls that you're making, keep those as a record. It's really good to have sort of a standardized attempt to contact protocol or research protocols that you can follow in these situations to ensure consistency. And if you're working for an organization where you anticipate this being a common issue, put that in your collections management policy. If you are able to contact the lender, then you can either resume the loan under a new contract, you can return the loan to the original lender or to their descendants, or you can choose to acquire the piece permanently into your collection. If you are not able to contact the lender, now it's time to consider your legal obligations. We talked about this really briefly during my first webinar, but there's two sorts of laws that you can consult as you're trying to figure out what your legal obligations here moving forward are. So before you can do anything else with this piece, acquire it, deaccession it, whatever, you need to be able to prove that you have clear and unrestricted ownership of the item. You can't do that under an indeterminate loan unless you've either contacted the lender or broken the original agreements that were part of that loan contract with legal backing to do so. You can either do that using your state's specific old loan laws. It won't always be called literally old loan law. It may be called abandoned loan law, left loan laws. Most states have some version of this at this point. I know Pennsylvania just implemented theirs as recently as 2023. And that's really great because this gives you very specific legal backing for whatever it is that you need to do next. It is still recommended that you consult some sort of legal counsel, even if you do have an old loan law. You really need to consult legal counsel if you're going to use common law. If you happen to live in a state that doesn't have an old loan law, common law simply refers to any state of law that is determined by precedent and not necessarily by legislation passed. For that reason, it's not necessarily airtight and it's very rarely used in these situations, which is why you really want to make sure you have legal counsel to consult in that situation. We are doing this all with the intention that if the lender should ever appear, if their descendants should ever reappear, that you have legal precedent and airtight legal justification for the actions that you've taken. That's why we're keeping a record of everything we try to do. That's why we're using lawyers if we do have to go the legal route. If you are successfully able to consult your laws and get a clear path forward, you just go back to your options. You can either resume the loan if you are eventually able to contact or they get in touch with you. You can return it again if you are able to somehow make contact. But most often what's going to happen is you'll acquire it into your collection, and then you're free to do with it as you like, including deaccession. All right, let's move on to undocumented objects. Similarly, quite a big bogeyman for a lot of people dealing with collections that have previously not been well managed. An undocumented object is an object with no identification number or record. So you just find it in your collection and you have no idea how it got there and you can't find any documentation on it. A lot of the times that term is used interchangeably with found in collection, but they don't mean the same thing. So an object can be legally designated as found in collection if you find an undocumented object and you are unable to reconcile it with a record. We'll get into that a little bit more in a second. So what might cause undocumented objects? Kind of the similar things that cause old loans, staff turnover, poor intellectual control, meaning you don't really know what you have, inconsistent or incomplete record keeping, no processing procedures. So when we say processing, we mean that documentation that happens when anything comes into your organization, that initial, okay, what do I have? What does it look like? Where did it come from? Am I going to keep it? Or maybe you've switched processing procedures recently and there was a little bit of a fuzzy turnover, or you have a new collections management system and written records just haven't quite made their way over to the system yet. So here's what you're going to do. You are going to assign a temporary tracking number and a temporary record. These will be temporary. It's just really important for your own liability that you have some sort of method of keeping track of where this thing is and what it is as you're trying to figure out what to do with it. Then you'll attempt to reconcile. By reconcile, we mean matching it with an existing object record. If you can reconcile it, that's great. You're just going to return it to its original number and add that tracking number to the record, most likely just in the notes section somewhere, so that if somebody were to ever find that old tracking number or that old tracking record in the future, they can match it to this actual record and kind of follow the trail of what happened there and not have questions in their mind about, well, did this ever get reconciled? What is the thing? What was the record that it was reconciled with? And it can be really good to do the other. So don't delete the tracking number and the temporary record, but in the notes of that, put the actual identification number and link the actual record if you can. If you're not able to reconcile, you're going to consult with your state property law. That would be you can consult your abandoned property law. Again, that can get really complex and it's really good to do that with legal counsel. I believe that we have a webinar about that was put on maybe 1.5 years ago that was really popular and has really great information on it. If you are able,
just gonna say, that's a good point, Katie. I can make sure that we follow up and maybe have that in the resources that we send after the webinar.
yes, that's great, Greg. Thank you. After consultation, most often the next step is going to be accessioning the object, at which point it gets its own FAIC number, so its own found in collections number. It is now legally designated as found in collections. You have acquired it into your collection, but you want to make sure that you specifically designate in all tracking moving forward that it was found in collections, and that's why there's no provenance in that record. And then now that you've acquired it, you can choose to either keep it or deaccession it based on whether it fits within your collection scope, whether it's in good standing, whether you feel you're able to care for it properly, all that good stuff. All right. I know when I was a collections manager, this is the one that haunted me the most, and these are missing objects. So this is an object that has a record but cannot be physically located. Lots of things can cause this, a lot of the same things we've discussed previously, as well as some new introductions. So it can be staff turnover or intellectual control, inconsistent or incomplete record keeping. There I'm specifically talking about, this is an object that gets moved around a lot, gets put on exhibit, taken off, goes out for treatment, comes back, is accessed by a researcher, is put back on a different shelf, and there's not a system for tracking all the different places that it goes. No processing procedures, meaning it came to you, you didn't process it, so therefore you didn't record where you physically put it after it was accessioned. New processing procedures or a new collections management system, no exhibit or no loan policy. I'm going to specifically call out the loan policy because, again, with a really airtight exhibit policy, you will have a written system where you say, we're going to track when this goes on exhibit, we'll track where it is, we'll track when it comes back off again, and then where it's put back in storage. Theft may also, unfortunately, be a cause for this. I would say it's much more rare than any of these other more menial things that can happen during the day. And again, just no system for object tracking. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go into the record and you're going to designate it as either lost or missing, or if you have another term that your organization uses, use that one. You'll attempt to locate it and you need to document all of that, because if you're not able to locate it at some point, if you have insurance, you'll want to be submitting an insurance claim and you'll need to have a lot of information justifying the insurance claim. So attempt to locate, again, this is another situation where it's really good to have a standardized protocol for literally what the steps are to do this. If you are able to locate it, amazing, huge flood of relief. That sounds and feels incredible. You rehouse it and you log the new location. If you cannot locate it, you want to do everything you can to determine the last known location. If there's any way that you can look back at previous emails, previous external loan documents, previous decisions to send something out for treatment, anything that you can find that may point to it moving from where you think it should be to where it is currently, and document that search. If that results in you locating the item, great, rehouse it and log the new location. If not, that is when, if you have insurance, it's time to make an insurance claim. Whether you have insurance or not, you do not delete the object record, just in case it's ever gonna return at some point in the future. This one's a little bit less panicky, but it does happen, I think, to a lot of us, often because standards for information collecting change over time. New research is happening all the time. We're not always able to complete full inventories the first time we do them. So maybe you're going back and you're doing a full one and you need to add more information to the record. So what can cause missing or incorrect information on the record? Again, staff turnover, intellectual control, inconsistent or incomplete record keeping, no processing procedures, new processing procedures, and like I said, new research or new standards. One thing that I want to sort of throw into this that isn't quite captured by the title of missing or incorrect is if you have a collection that is displaying maybe potentially offensive or harmful stereotypes, and you have not yet gotten to a point where you're able to go into that catalog record and use more sensitive and more modern language, that is also something that you may encounter and need to address. So there's a few things you can do. Flag the object record. Some systems like Past Perfect, which I'm most familiar with, literally have a flag that you can click, whatever you need to do to just kind of say, hey, there's an issue here. Indicate that in the record. If you have the time currently, go ahead and just do that research now and make the modifications. That's probably not the situation that you're in. This is probably something that you need to flag and then pin for later. When you come back to it, if the record is publicly searchable, you have a few options. You can either temporarily unpublish that record, you can keep it published but delete the inaccurate information, or you can keep it exactly as it is and include some note that says this is undergoing review, we know this information is incorrect, check back later. Whatever you choose to do, you then go and you do your research and modification and then return the record to normal with the new information updated. This is the other thing that I think causes a lot of panic for people besides the routine or besides the kind of legal stressors like old loans, and that's hazards. I really want to make sure that we spend some time on this and we include it, because my experience so far in this role has been a lot more places, especially small historical societies, have more hazards than they think they do, or have hazards even when they thought they didn't have any at all. Part of that is just because for a lot of historical societies in this country, for whatever reason, the century that we are most often collecting from is the 19th century. And if anything is true about the 19th century, it's that we made a lot of poisonous stuff. That is still something we need to be careful when we find it. So you may find mold, you may find pests, you may find sharps and protrusions, You may find toxic materials like lead, arsenic, asbestos, mercury, uranium, or old medicine. You might find biohazards. When I say biohazards, I'm talking about the less savory things. So I'm currently consulting with an individual who works for an institution that collects ephemera related to the mid-century civil rights campaign here in the United States. And she has a letter that was written to a student that was attempting to integrate that has fecal matter on it. And that's a biohazard that has to be handled in a specific way. When I've worked for the Holocaust Museum, we had many things that were covered in bodily fluids that need to be really specifically, both sensitively exhibited, but also really carefully handled. So we're talking about things like bodily fluids and waste. You may also find flame risks. So those are things like cellulose nitrate and cellulose acetate, those really unstable plastics that were used at the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th, or ammunition. So those could either be things that have the potential to spontaneously combust in really high temperatures, like cellulose nitrate, or things that are going to accelerate or worsen a fire in the instance of one, like the acetate or ammunition. I have broken each of these categories down into their own sort of flow chart here because some of them are relatively simple in their response and some of them not so much. So for mold and pests, this is generally what your response is going to look like. You will immediately flag that object record and immediately restrict handling. So only people who are trained to handle mold infested or pest infested items can handle it moving forward. Put on your PPE. When we're talking about mold specifically, at the very minimum, you need to have an N95 or a KN95, even better if it's a professionally fitted respirator. Nitrile gloves, and if you want to make me personally really happy, some fitted goggles. Then you want to isolate the item. What we're really trying to do here is prevent spread to any of the other collections. I kept making that put on ice joke earlier at the beginning, where you can literally freeze these things. Freezing will kill the pests, it will inactivate the mold, and it will also just arrest any further degradation so that you can sort of get your ducks in a row and figure out what to do next here. Then you want to research and confirm. There are a lot of things that look like mold that are not mold. It can be really great to take a second and breathe and just take lots of really good documentary pictures before you go isolate that piece. And then research, see, is it efflorescence? Is it plasticizer migration? Maybe this isn't actually mold. With pests, there are so many species of insects in this country alone, and they are very difficult to discern unless you're looking at them very, very closely. So you need to take the time to check, okay, is this something that I really need to be worried about that has potentially spread to other objects, that is potentially eating my collections? Or is this maybe its benign cousin that looks a little bit similar? So take the time to figure out specifically what you're dealing with. And then once you have an answer, do your salvage, triage, and treatment. Sometimes you'll be able to handle it in-house with something like freezing. Sometimes if it's like a really large mold bloom or a really large pest infestation, you're going to need to call in outside help or maybe send it off to a conservator. Once that's done, you are going to permanently update handling procedures for that piece. Anything that has dealt with a mold infestation or a pest infestation is necessarily less structurally sound. Mold eats away at the substrate of what it's affecting. Pests very often are boring into the substrate, and so it needs to be handled a lot more delicately. If it has gotten moldy in the past, it is far more likely to get moldy again in the future. This is because we're very often only deactivating mold, not killing it. So those mold spores are still going to be in there in the substrate, and they're just waiting to be reactivated once they're back in a really juicy, wonderful environment. So we need to keep that in mind, even if we don't see anything on the surface. If necessary, update your CMP, your collections management policy, to reflect more stringent handling moving forward, maybe more routine checks of the collection. You also want to update the object record. We want to know in as many places as we possibly can that there has been some history of infestation for future carers. And the object label, it's really important for people who are going to handle something to know the hazards of what they may be about to handle. Lots of people have mold allergies and may not necessarily be eligible to directly touch something that's been previously affected by mold. And then once that's done, you can return to your regular operations. For sharps and protrusions, again, flag that object record and immediately restrict handling. Put on your PPE. In these situations, you want a glove that's cut resistant. So get long sleeves on, and then a lot of cut resistant gloves will go all the way up to the elbow. They won't always, sometimes they'll stop in kind of the mid arm, but you're looking for something that is either a really, really thick polyethylene, a Kevlar, stainless steel. There's lots of options out there, usually at a relatively low price, but you want to protect your hands from any cuts, especially if you're dealing with old medical equipment. You don't know how sanitary that is. Protectively rehouse. I was actually just talking about this in a workshop yesterday. There are lots of great ways to protectively rehouse a sharp. You can put it in a foam mount with the sharp sticking into the foam and not sticking out. You can get a really thin moldable foam like Valera and wrap it around the tip of whatever that sharp part of the object is. Essentially, what we want to do is just avoid a situation where somebody is going to reach in a box or reach in a drawer and that sharp is left up and uncovered, and there's a risk for cut damage. Update the handling procedures, the collections management policy, and the record and the object label if necessary. Again, with the same intention behind the mold, we really want to give people an opportunity to know that they are opening a box with something sharp in it, and then return to regular operations. Okay, obviously this is the most stressful and involved version of all of these, but it's less complicated, I think, than it originally looks. So just as with the other options, if you find toxic materials, flame risks, or biohazards, you are immediately going to flag the record and restrict handling. Put on your PPE. This is going to be very dependent on the specific thing that you find. At a minimum, nitrile gloves. Isolate the item if need be. Again, we're going to want to do research and confirmation. This is a little tricky for things like toxic materials and biohazards because a lot of times the only way to confirm that it is what you think it is to send it to a lab for testing, and that's not always financially feasible for a lot of folks. If you live near a university that has a lab, sometimes labs are really willing to run those tests for free so that the students can get a little bit of practice, so bear that in mind. If you are able to confirm that it is not hazardous, that's amazing. Indicate the safety of the object on its record. We want a situation where if another collections manager 30 years from now encounters that same object and has the same concerns, they can see in your notes that you already did your due diligence. And then you just return to regular operations. If you are not able to confirm one way or the other, it's best to treat the object as hazardous, just because it's better to be safer than sorry. If you are able to confirm it's hazardous, you're going to follow the same protocols you were if you were unable to confirm. So you can either protectively rehouse if you feel that it is not enough of a hazard that you're at immediate risk, the building's at immediate risk, your visitors are at immediate risk. If you feel you can handle it, and if it's really in alignment with your mission, keep it and protectively rehouse it in whatever way makes sense for what you've specifically found. As with everything else, update the documentation so that folks going to find it know what it is that they're dealing with, and then return to regular operations. Your other option is to deaccession it. If you do that, you do have to follow your state disposal laws. So things like cellulose nitrate, their storage and disposal are controlled by federal fire code just because they are so flammable. Old medicines, a lot of them are like controlled substances. And so there's specific laws that we need to follow for their disposal as well. Okay. Let's say you find condition issues in rehousing. This is probably going to be a lot more of a common thing to encounter than a full-on hazard. But here we're talking about things like leaks, embrittlement. You found something that's been housed wrong, so it's over time gotten kind of crushed and warped. You're dealing with archival slump, so that's when you have papers or books on a shelf that haven't been properly supported, so they start doing this and they stay like that for a while, and then you try to take them off the shelf and they hold that shape. Yellowing, cockling, fatty spew, the other term for that is fatty bloom. I kept that in there as a little giggle for you guys, but also because it is something that you might deal with. That's when you have a leather item where the fat molecules in the leather have just migrated to the surface and it has this kind of waxy residue. You might be dealing with plasticizer migration, efflorescence, or your object has been damaged because it was too small for the original housing. So it's either kind of gotten deformed by being in the housing or in your attempts to pull it out, some damage occurred. Pretty simple response. Again, flag it, restrict handling if you need to. If it's really, really delicate now and it needs to be handled with a little more care and a little more training, that needs to be indicated. Perform a condition report. In that report, indicate any response or treatment if needed. It could be as simple as it just needs to go in better housing, or it could need to go to a conservator. You want to consult your collections management and policy and relevant staff before you take any extensive remediation measures here, because not everything is going to be a priority. You may find something that is really seriously damaged, but it's a very low value to your organization. You never really use it on exhibit. Nobody really accesses it for research. Is that something that you necessarily want to invest time and resources in remediating? You can consult your collections management policy and other staff members to sort of make a decision there. If you do decide to do something, you salvage, triage, and treat. Make sure you log any changes that you make. So any treatment it receives, any rehousing or any relocation into its object record, and then return to regular operations. Okay, this is the last one. This one stresses me out. It's very specific to specific organizations and individuals. So if this does not apply to you, feel free to just tune out this part of the presentation, but this is NAGPRA. This is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. I believe it passed in either 1990 or 1991. This is a federal law mandating the protection and return of Indigenous human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony. If you had never heard about this law before the last year and a half, you probably have heard about it in the last year and a half, because the actual regulations associated with this law were updated to be a little bit more strict. And there was a lot of concern, panic, stress amongst organizations that were worried about how to be compliant with the new regulations. It's really important to remember that NAGPRA is only applicable to federal organizations, not counting the Smithsonian. They have their own system of operations related to Indigenous repatriation that is separate from this law. Organizations that are receiving federal funds, so you're not a federal organization, but you are currently receiving federal funding, or you have received federal funding in the past. So the good news with the new regulations is that it really limits your immediate actions. So the new regulations do not allow for any accessing of that object without express written consent from descendants. So that means it cannot be accessed by researchers. You may not perform any additional research on it, and you may not exhibit it. So if you find something that you think may be NAGPRA eligible, you are going to immediately flag the object record and immediately restrict handling. Isolate it in storage. It's really, really good to have a separate storage location for NAGPRA eligible objects, just from an ethical perspective. And if they are on exhibit or they are made available to researchers on your website, immediately take them off exhibit or from your website. You want to make sure you label the object housing. That way, folks who are encountering, where you keep your NAGPRA eligible objects know that that's what that is. And then you stop. You cannot perform any further research. You may not even research to confirm whether this object is NAGPRA eligible, because if it is, then you have violated the new regulations that say no further research without express written consent. As stressful as that is, there is some really, really incredible free guidance through the National Park Service's official NAGPR website. They did a really incredible job in the last year and a half at putting out very clear educational resources. They did many listening sessions and education sessions where folks were invited to come ask really specific questions about what they might find. All of those things have been recorded and are available on the website. And up until recently, there were people who worked for the NPS who you could explicitly and specifically consult with as you were trying to do this work. I don't know if that's still the case. That's it. Here are our final thoughts. I know this is scary. It doesn't have to be any more scary. You have so many free resources available to you written by experts, and new information can only be helpful. As you find things, take the time to create new policies to prevent any further issues moving forward. So you have that nice, smooth runway in the rest of your career and for anyone who then later takes over that collection after you. And remember that you've got this. You are doing a wonderful job. You are not alone in dealing with these things. That is my email at the bottom here. We're going to keep that on screen for a while. I think we have some good time for questions. Before we get to questions, I want to shout out this book that I have in front of me here. I meant to shout it out when we were talking about old loans and I didn't. If you are a collections manager and you don't have a copy of this book, A Legal Primer on Managing Museum Collections, I really encourage you to get it. This is the third edition. It was published in 2012. The fourth edition was just published in 2025. I really encourage you to get an up-to-date edition. One of the things that's in here is a list of all of the states with old loan laws. And so obviously the one from 2012 is going to be out of date. This will be included in the list of resources that will go out to you later. Okay, that's it.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, it's great. We've had a really active chat this whole time. Not only some great questions, but just like a lot of people sharing stories, sharing ideas. It's really
See,
nice.
that's awesome.
So the first question, if I'm just going in order, is from Molly, who asks, any advice for when the lending institution has closed and your institution is now responsible for the records of the prior institution? I'm wondering if we've seen anything like this, Katie.
So the old institution is closed and you're now, so this is a situation where the organization has been sunsetted and for whatever reason, they have passed ownership of their collection onto you as like a repository. Oh, that's a really good question. And they were, if this person is still here, my follow-up question is, those records before the organization was closed, they were never designated, they were never switched over as a gift, as a donation. They remained as like a loan. If you're here, pop an answer in the chat. What I will say is while we're kind of waiting on that answer, that exact scenario is in here. So I really encourage you to take a look at this. One of the things that I really love about this book is it uses actual legal cases to illustrate the concepts that they're trying to explain. And there is a legal case in here that is what I think what you're describing. You do follow the old loan laws, I think with maybe some additional things to consider, but there is guidance for that. I'm sorry, I can't give you anything more specific.
Just in the chat, Molly says this is a religious archive working with churches.
The same laws would still apply. The question remains, though, of whether they designated formal ownership to you before they closed. The first thing that you would have to do is try to find a representative. I would think the first thing would be to try to find a representative who was originally in a leadership position at that organization and see if you can obtain records of transfer after the fact. And then if not, you'd have to consult the old loan laws.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see here. We have a number of people sharing about just some examples of things that they're doing, you know, found in collection objects labeled 2025.001, like as a start. Some people mentioning they're going to be just starting their own inventories. Some advice, again, the found in collection is such a hot topic.
Yeah.
So a lot of things about that. So thank you everybody for sharing all those examples. Here's a question. As an institute that purposefully collects objects that contain many toxic compounds, the Science History Institute, is there an existing protocol related to safety data sheets? I've started attaching them to the past perfect records using the media tab, but is there more that should be done?
Really good question. I mean, I don't know specifically. I've never heard the term safety data sheet, so I'm wondering if that's referring to something I don't know. Let me just say I love you guys at the Science History Institute. You guys are wonderful. You're doing such amazing work. You're so cool. Um, for sure, there should be some sort of physical copy of that data as well, and that's put in the actual storage location on the outside of the container or housing if possible. If what I'm saying is not quite getting at what you need, there is a really wonderful webinar that was done, I think back in 2020 by Connecting to Collections Care. I can't remember the name of the conservator that did it, but if you Google Connecting to Collections Care, um, like dealing with toxic materials, it's gonna get exactly what you're asking at here. It's just a full hour dedicated to how to properly respond when you find those things. I'll make sure that that gets included in the resources as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Um, this is a little off topic, but if anybody has a source for acid-free archival paperboard boxes ranging from 2 by 2 inches to 8 by 10, looking for sources for those. I'm just going to kind of flag that. Any advice for solo archivists doing this work?
Hmm. I think I'm the wrong person to ask because I'm just going to give you an emotional response, which is to be patient with yourself and let yourself be a learner and don't feel like you need to address everything that comes up right away. I think it's really helpful to know your collection and know what your specific goals and concerns are going into it. That way, as things come up that fit within those priorities, you're prioritizing those actions and not letting yourself get pulled off in a million different directions, if that helps.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Katie. Next question here, and maybe I'll ask this question, then maybe just do a call for one more, kind of a last call for one more question before we wrap up, since we are getting towards the hour. So consulting common law for old loans is only for those state laws or states that do not have abandoned property laws.
Yes, you should not need to consult common law if your state has an old loan law. It won't be applicable. The old loan law will directly apply to whatever it is that your situation is. The common law is just there as kind of, well, we need some sort of legal justification for the action that we need to take here. And so let's see if there's precedent. It is not as safe a bet. So if you have an old loan law, you should really go that way instead. Oh, thank you, Marion. That looks like such fun. When I have time, I'm gonna watch that. That looks amazing.
Awesome. I love just how kind of active y'all are in the chat sharing these resources, because there are a lot out there, and you know, it's so nice to see this community kind of coming together around these big questions.
There's another really great resource. Jennifer just put one in the chat that I really like. There's another great resource that's put out through some organization in the UK that I really, really love. It is so user friendly. It gives you lots of great pictures of things that may potentially contain that material that you're concerned about. It's clickable. It's like a database. I really love it. I'll make sure that that gets in the resource sheet that gets sent out as well. Also, everyone, thank you everybody who's educating me about safety data sheets. That's really interesting.
Nice. So yeah, I think this is great. We've had so much great conversation here today already, and just so grateful to everybody for showing up. Big thanks to Katie, for all of you for showing up today. If this was a helpful program for you, please consider a donation to CCHA to help us continue to offer this kind of programming. So our next webinar is titled Meet Sandrine Blaise, our NEA Conservation Fellow, on August 14th at noon. You'll get a glimpse into our paper conservation lab and all the great work that she's been doing over her fellowship over the past 2 years. So we hope to see you there. When this program ends, a little survey will pop up after the window closes, and we'd kindly ask that you fill it out to let us know how we're doing. So thank you everybody for coming today, and we hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful afternoon or whatever time it is where you're tuning in from.
Bye, everybody.